Good evening. Welcome to Talk to Satv, sponsored by Grand Palace Hotel and Resort, where we dive into the deep discussions of most pressing global and national issues. Ladies and gentlemen, Bangladesh stands at a critical juncture, where education, culture, and innovations are shaping the future of a resilient and knowledge-driven society. At the heart of this transformation is the work of UNESCO, a global institution dedicated to advance learning, safeguard heritage, and promoting freedom of expression. Today, we are honored to join by Dr. Susan Vize, whose leadership continues to strengthen UNESCO and Bangladesh partnership. Mr. Vize, a warm welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Vize, Dr. Vize, UNESCO has played a vital role globally in advancing education, culture, and knowledge. So could you briefly share the UNESCO's core mandate and its strategic priorities in Bangladesh?
So, as you said, UNESCO focuses on 4 key areas: education, culture, sciences, and freedom of expression. And UNESCO often works through developing global level agreements about what would be like a standard that the whole world could live up to. So, for example, before the SDGs, we had something called Education for All, and that laid out a track of how education, the key things education needed to do for all countries in the world to get to a point where citizens are well informed, make good decisions, etc. In culture, we have conventions, and again, they set out standards for protecting heritage of different nature. For media and information, we have similar things. We have media information standards. So, for example, one of the more recent things would be disability in media standards, or gender indicators for media organizations. So a lot of what we do at the global part is negotiating, having dialogue with countries, with different groups from different religions to different cultures, different languages, to find out what would be acceptable to everybody, and then coming up with a kind of a global policy or standard. And then at the country level, we use those to develop local programs and adapt them. We can't just take something from the global level and say, Bangladesh, do this. We actually take the learnings and then we look at the local context, and then we adapt those.
So that's how it aligns with the government's development policy.
Yes.
So what about the sustainable development goals? How do they help, achieve the governments to achieve sustainable development goals?
So obviously SDG 4, which is all about education, is very much what UNESCO is working with the government on. We help the government to develop particular policy areas depending on the needs of the country. So an example could be, here we're working on education for sustainable development, climate change, things like that. So we've worked with the government to develop a roadmap for how they want to achieve what's under indicator 4.7, which is some of the things that relate to the environment, other aspects of sustainability. We also help the government to develop an information system that helps to monitor progress. So we do SDG annual reviews where we look at the statistics and the data to say, is Bangladesh progressing or not? Is it static? Is it going down? And then that gives the government information to decide how they will actually tackle the things that aren't moving forward as they want to. The other indicators or the other SDGs, we have a lesser part. Some of them, like gender equality or peace and freedom of expression, is under SDG 16. We have some environmental ones. We're not the lead agency, but we contribute in smaller ways. So, for example, under something like the one on oceans and water, we have the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, and we look particularly at ocean acidity and ocean. It's actually a shared resource too. It's not just one country. We look at how we can get the countries to work together to address issues such as that.
Education remains the heart of the UNESCO's mission.
Yes.
Well, what are the key initiatives currently being undertaken to promote inclusive and quality education?
So the first area that we're working on relates to teachers, and it's looking at teachers holistically, from working conditions, recruitment policies, retention policies, capacity building, and looking at that system to try to ensure that teachers are professional, teachers are at the right standard for what they need to deliver, but they're also having a fair employment situation, etc. They're getting properly remunerated and rewarded, because it's not always an easy job to be a teacher. True. So this is part of we've been working on a strategy for teacher professionalisation with the country now for the last couple of years, and we're about to launch a bigger initiative to start rolling this out. This is jointly with UNICEF, and it will be focusing on developing particularly the capacity building, pre-service training, and so that's one area. A second area that we work on, as I mentioned, education data and statistics, helping the country to know where it's doing well, where it's not doing well, and where it needs to invest more money, change policy, etc. Mm-hmm. We've been working also on some particular topic areas, such as we have a program called Health Promoting Schools, looking at how, this is a holistic model, how can schools promote the health and well-being of teachers and students. So it's not just about having a subject called health in the curriculum, it's about looking at the school environment, looking at the school's policies, looking at teachers and how they're prepared to do this. And similarly, we have one on climate smart education, where we're looking at systematically at the whole system, from school buildings and are they climate ready, through to can teachers, do they have the knowledge to teach climate change, and what's in the curriculum. But also trying to link the data that's coming out of ministries like the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change to the school system, so that there's a connection between the knowledge in the technical ministries and the education ministries, so they can work together. So those would be 4 things that we're working on in education.
Well, in the context of digital transformation, education is now, moved towards digital transformation.
Yes.
Everybody is transforming education digitally. So how into this UNESCO chips in?
So a few years back, we did something called the ICT and Education Policy. It's a little bit outdated now, because digital systems are changing fairly rapidly. We are planning to work with the ministries to rework on that. We've also done a few, you have a thing called the National Academy of Education Management. Exactly. We've worked with them to develop some teacher training courses on digital skills and AI competencies. Mm-hmm. We've also, and in this teacher professionalisation project I mentioned, digital will be one of the aspects that we'll be focused on, in making sure that the digital tools and the knowledge is there for the teachers. So that will be integrated into that. Mm-hmm. We've also recently carried out, and it's not specific to education, we did a readiness assessment of Bangladesh for AI. So looking at, do you have the right legislation in place? Do you have data about AI? Do you know what businesses are using AI? And one of the themes under that specifically was education, and how ready is the education system for AI. So we have some data, and we're also now looking at the next phase of that, and that will be looking at, in particular, how we can upskill civil servants, not necessarily teachers, but policymakers and others, to also understand about AI and how AI is going to impact on their industry. Because, we can't be making policy for AI in the education ministry if they don't have a basic preparedness around AI. So that's something that we'll be also doing this year.
Bangladesh is very rich in cultural heritage. Dr. Vize, could you elaborate the UNESCO's role in terms of safeguarding both tangible and intangible cultural heritage in this country?
Yes. So again, coming back to the global level, we have a series of conventions, and the conventions set out in particular how we want to protect things that are globally important. Mm-hmm. So we work on 2 levels, and I'm sure many of the viewers will have heard of World Heritage, for example. Mm-hmm. So this is a global level recognition. So to have a World Heritage site, it has to be globally important, not just important to Bangladesh. So I think you probably know that there are 3 World Heritage sites here. We work with the Department of Archaeology, who is the lead, particularly they're therefore responsible for managing the World Heritage sites. So we work with them to help them to generate projects that will improve the management, improve the capacity of the staff, and bring those out to the community. So we want World Heritage to not be just something that's like a museum where things are behind a glass case. We want kids in the neighbourhood to be able to understand that. So soon we'll be doing a program in Baggerhat that is actually going to be bringing children and the local community more into understanding what the World Heritage Site is about and how it's managed. So all of the heritage has those aspects. One is protection. Another one is looking at how can we promote this and pass the skills or the knowledge on to others. And then the third part is always about bringing the community in and education and things like that. It's the same for intangible. Intangible is what we call living heritage. So it's things like dances and weaving and all of these things. And again, we want to archive or preserve the knowledge. We want to make sure that it's promoted and used, and then we want this to be passed on to new generations and communities so that they know what's there. We recently completed a thing, we call it the Heritage Emergency Fund. So after the uprising in 2024, a number of cultural sites were damaged. So we've been working with the Ministry of Culture, the National Museum and others to make an assessment of the damage and then have a plan for protecting heritage, both sites and practices during future emergencies. You know, it's a climate-prone country. There's going to be natural disasters. So how can the heritage sector be more prepared to deal with these when they happen in the future?
Well, how important is it in this era of AI to preserve and foster the national identity in terms of heritage and the global understanding in today's interconnected world?
I do believe that heritage and sport can often be a really good way to bring people together, to be inclusive. We have a book on traditional sports in Bangladesh. And every time we have a storybook, every time we give it to somebody, they say, oh, I want to do this, I want to show my children. And it doesn't matter if they're a minister or another person, they really connect with this and they want to show this to their children and pass it on. So it's about connecting with different groups and also connecting with different generations. And heritage is a really good way to do that because most people in Bangladesh identify with it. It doesn't matter if you're Hindu or Muslim or Christian or Indigenous or Bangla speaker, everybody identifies with some of these things. So making sure that we have festivals, making sure that we have these sites, they can be a way to bring together the different elements of the community. They can do the same at an international level as well, because one of the things that most foreigners know about Bangladesh is the Sundarbans. So this is something that brings foreigners to come and see the country, to learn more about the culture, to understand, you know, the Bangladeshi people, because outsiders often don't see Bangladeshis as having a very separate identity. Because of the history with India, etc. So these things really help to create the Bangladesh that other people see, but also I think the identity within the country.
Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time to go on a short break on Talk to SATV, sponsored by Grand Palace Hotel and Resort. Please do come back after the break. Welcome to Talk to SATV, sponsored by Grand Palace Hotel and Resort. Before the break, Dr. Vize was discussing about the importance of, skilled teacher in schools and how UNESCO is working on it. She also said that the importance of preserving the archaeological sites, especially the culture, and how UNESCO is focusing on, intangible heritage, to preserve the intangible heritage as well. Dr. Vize, UNESCO is a strong advocate of freedom of expression, and press freedom always. So what initiatives are currently in place to support ethical journalism and media development?
So our biggest area of work that we've been doing at the moment has been related to the elections. we've been working with UNDP and UN Women on a project called Ballot, and this was our particular role in this was to work with media organisations to ensure that they were prepared to report fairly on the elections, safely, fairly, ethically, and address things like fake news, misinformation, etc. So we've been working with a number of partners in the country, including PIB, DRIC, MRDI, SACMED, Shamashti, to train journalists around the country to understand about political reporting, safety of journalists, and ethical promotion of information and use of information. We've done that in locations around the country, and we're continuing to work with some of the groups there. We particularly wanted to make sure we gave opportunities to women journalists with this. So we had 5 trainings for women journalists in that mix. In Rajshahi, actually they were at the university where you're from recently, in Jashore, in Chattogram, and in Dhaka.
That's wonderful. Dr. Vize, the main problem that we do have in terms of freedom of expression, the government austerity measures and the government's different policy to, on the reporters, and as well as misinformation, spreading of misinformation. That is a very important agenda that's been coming out in this 21st century. So what UNESCO is doing in terms of identifying the misinformation?
Yeah. Misinformation is particularly bad across South Asia, but it's a global thing, obviously. It can't be stopped. So I guess what we in particular are trying to do is to make sure that consumers of media understand how to critically evaluate what they get. So we have been doing some work on fact-checking with FactWatch at ULab. We're doing trainings with university students. But in particular, we want to make sure that all of the young people in the country are media information literate, is what we call it. And that means that when you read something in a newspaper or TV or YouTube or even on Facebook, you can say, I don't believe that. There's no credible information or data to support what that person is saying. And to give young people these skills, I think, is the only way we can really address this, because we're always going to be faced with misinformation. I think another key issue in Bangladesh has been safety of journalists, particularly around elections. They've not been, there's been a lot of journalists that have been injured, hurt, even killed in this country. I'm really pleased to say the last election we didn't have any journalists killed. It was a fantastic result for Bangladesh, but we also want to continue to work on, media organisations being aware of safety and knowing how to manage safety. And I think a third area would be regulation, as you said. We promote self-regulation for the media, and that globally has been shown to have the best results, because it gives a good balance between free and independent pluralistic media being able to express different opinions, but also being ethical in having standards. You have to have some level of regulation. You have to have standards like a code of conduct or code of ethics. And so self-regulation is where you can try to make a balance of this without having to clamp down too much with regulation, because it's very difficult to have a regulated system, because you would know, being in the media industry, that when you ban something, or it's like a gross measure, it doesn't have the fineness to deal with individual situations that might be useful. So self-regulation and responsible media is what we generally promote.
Dr. Vize, you have said about the training that UNESCO is providing, but is it bearing fruit? Because the freedom of expression is very important for good governance as well. So when you train those reporters and the kind of problems that they're facing, especially the media houses, and so in terms of identifying the problems that we do have, and is it bearing fruit, the trainings that you are providing to journalists?
I do think it's a much bigger thing than just providing some training. And the training that we've been providing, we trained around a bit over 3,500 journalists. There's probably
That's a big number.
between 8 and 12,000 people who work in some form as journalists in the country. Some of them are professionally trained, some of them are people who are doing it just for some extra pocket money, like a stringer or something like that. So it needs to actually come down to, and link with the self-regulation, because the media houses themselves have to actually provide the environment or the support for things like fact-checking. Not all the media houses actually have something in place. They don't all have policies on or ethical guidelines. Some of them do and some of them don't. And I think we really need to work on the regulation and getting the support from the owners, media owners and the editors, as well as from the journalists, and then it will gradually become more professional. I think there's a lot of journalism courses in the country now. They're all relatively new, and I hope that they'll also contribute to, you know, professionalizing the journalists. But this is something where it's not going to happen just from 6 months of training courses. It's got to be a long-term goal.
Let us turn into the science and innovation. We know UNESCO also promotes science and innovation. So my question to you, how is UNESCO contributing to building knowledge-based societies in Bangladesh?
So our science program here is very new. We only started last year. We've been focusing on biodiversity and disaster risk reduction as two core things, and I think the third area would be youth capacity development. The biosphere program that we're trying to start here we have this thing called the Man and Biosphere program, and the idea is to use natural sites as a living laboratory, as a place for education, where regardless of whether you're a young person or an old person, you can go and you can connect with nature and you can find out how to do things in a sustainable manner. So we're hoping that September this year, Bangladesh will have its first biosphere reserve, and then we'll be working on that. The second area on disaster risk reduction, we're part of a bigger system called Early Warning for All, and here UNESCO's role is really to support data-driven decision making in disaster preparedness. So ensuring that you have the data systems, that you can analyze them and use them for being ready, being prepared. So it's called Early Warning for All. So it's about how do you use the data to make sure you warn people before disasters happen so that you can save lives.
Well, young people are the key drivers of change. So how does UNESCO engage youth in Bangladesh in its programs and initiatives?
We've started an initiative called Youth as Researchers. So far we've completed 2 rounds. The first one was on mental health in times of crisis, and we worked with young people to conduct research on the mental health impact of the student uprising in 2024. They looked into all kinds of things like how people's social media use contributed to their trauma during the uprising, to another one that looked at, we had the big floods that year also in Feni. They looked at young people in that area and how the floods impacted on their mental health. The second round that we've done, we've just published this week, is on Indigenous concepts of climate change and how the hill tracts communities and others are being affected by climate change, and how young people are involved in addressing this. And hopefully this year we're planning to do get young people to do research on AI. Because we think that's a topic that young people will really engage with, and it needs to be explored from the youth perspective. We know from a lot of conversations at universities I've been having that the lecturers are really struggling with the number of students who are using AI to generate their coursework. So it would be really interesting to look at AI from a young people's perspective, why they're using this, how they think it could be used responsibly, how that can be a part of what they use for their education, but used in a way that helps their education to another level and doesn't just replace their education.
Thank you, Satv. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time to go on a short break. Please do come back after the break, because we will discuss a lot more. Welcome to Talk to Satv, sponsored by Grand Palace Hotel and Resort. Before the break, Dr. Vize was discussing about how her endeavors regarding the engagement of the youth, because they are the future of this country. Dr. Vize, looking ahead, UNESCO's key priorities and the vision for Bangladesh in the coming years.
So at the moment, Bangladesh is really engaged with UNESCO. You may know that Bangladesh is now the president of the General Conference of Bangladesh, and that gives Bangladesh a real leadership role within the organization. Also, there's a lot of work being done to prepare new World Heritage nominations. I mentioned before the Biosphere Reserve nomination, new ICH nominations. We have now here 3 UNESCO chairs. These are universities that have entered cooperation agreements with UNESCO. We have many more universities that are interested in this. We have a UNESCO centre here, the International Mother Language Institute, which is a UNESCO recognised global centre on promoting mother language education, which is a really important topic as well that we haven't covered. So the level of engagement, I think, is really strong with us, and now it's a great time for us to explore how we can really work with key priorities of the government to assist at a technical level for how they can be linked to either these global UNESCO initiatives, how they can be linked to strategic frameworks here, like you mentioned about digital education and how important that is. How can we make sure that that is rolled out in a way that is beneficial for the country? There's data coming in from Europe and North America that's showing that digital learning is actually not having good results. It's reducing learning outcomes because of young people's reliance on devices. So we want to work with the government to make sure that when you roll out things like digital education, we bring together the best global learning to help Bangladesh find a course that is the most beneficial for the country.
You came here in 2022. So you have gone through a lot of days over here.
Yes.
And you have gone through a lot of stories as well. So is there any story that moved you over here after coming over here, the transformation that you have witnessed yourself, you want to share with our viewers?
I have to say, being here during the student uprising was certainly something that I never expected to see, and I think it really showed me that Bangladeshis really want to have a society and a culture that is supportive, efficient, and provides for the future of the country. Now, everybody has different political affiliations and different socioeconomic circumstances, but I think there is a real genuine desire amongst the Bangladeshi people to make the country a better place for everybody.
Well, Dr. Vize, do you have any message for your young generations and our viewers regarding the UNESCO's mission and its continued partnership with Bangladesh?
That's a big question. I think that young people, the future of Bangladesh is very much in their hands, and it's a fantastic example of how young people can engage in sustainable development here. There's so many active groups. What I would say to all of those young people is to continue doing what they're doing, to reach out and connect to each other. There's so many individual efforts happening. Working together, networking and building that will really help them to achieve both their personal goals, but also, the things that they're passionate about, whether they're an environmental advocate or a health advocate or a women's advocate. By working together and joining hands, I think that they can be stronger.
Well, where do you envisage Bangladesh after 5 to 10 years?
I think Bangladesh will, and I really hope this is true, will continue moving forward. I think that we will be in a position where we're getting the education system to be more quality than it is now by providing for the teachers and making sure that every young person in Bangladesh can have access to a good education. And I think that that will really, bring on everything else. There are a lot of other areas that aren't in UNESCO's mandate that hopefully will go in the same direction, but increasing the investment in education, focusing on the quality of education, connecting the different ministries together to support education, I think will really help to make this a much better system in the future.
Dr. Susan Vize, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on our show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, education shapes minds, culture shapes identity, and the knowledge shapes the future. Through its work in Bangladesh, UNESCO continues to bridge these pillars, empowering people, preserving heritage, building a more informed and inclusive society. We are very much honored to have you not only in this show, in this country as a country director, and we hope that your endeavors will, help us to achieve the SDGs, not only SDGs, our expected, growth for this country.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching this show. We will come back in the next week with a new guest. Until that time, goodbye. Allah Hafiz.